Hello and welcome back to our course, Learn How to Program for Beginners. This is actually going to be part 1 of 2. This is the final project. So these are the last 2 videos, and today we are going to be working on something very practical to end the course with. So here's an overview of what we are going to be doing today. We will build an expense tracker and organizer that creates a real file as output. So far we've been creating programs that print out to standard out, so to the screen, to the console screen. But now we're going to build something that actually makes a real file. So this will put together a lot of the skills we've learned throughout the course, and I hope that it's really enjoyable. There will be a part 1 and a part 2 of this so that we do not make a video that's too long for you guys and give you a nice break in between. So in order to get started, we will need to click on the link in the video notes. Alternatively, you can just type it in by hand. Once you've clicked on the link, you should have ended up in this page right here. And what you need to do is just to grab everything from here all the way down. And then just copy that. And then open up IntelliJ Community Edition like we have been doing. Once that is open, we want to create a new file. So we can call this file blank final project assignment, or whatever you want to call it actually, .kt, and then just copy and paste the stuff from the website and you're actually good to go. That was it. So like I mentioned earlier, what we're actually going to build is an expense tracker. So what is an expense? So for example, a car cost $14,000, a radio cost $23, toilet paper costs $11, so on and so forth. So there's 3 types of data that we're going to be tracking for each expense. So 3 fields that we are going to be keeping track of. The first one is the name of the expense. The second is how much money it costs. So this could be dollars or euros, obviously. And then the third one is going to be the month in which the expense was actually incurred. So let's get to it. Let's take a look at number 1 right here. So it says create the expense data class that has 3 fields. The first field is the name of type string, the amount of type double, and then the month of type month. So for this final project, we are going to be doing things kind of in steps. And then at the very end, we're going to kind of put everything together and we are going to create a file that is going to be sorted by month from January all the way to December, and it's going to show all of the expenses that you have incurred in a nice, neat CSV file that you can then use in real life if you really wanted to. So the first thing that we need to do is follow this number 1 right here. So it says create the expense data class that has 3 fields. All right, so what we need to do here is data class, because like we know, and we've talked about this several times, the point of this class is just to store information and then to retrieve it later on. So data class is a great way of doing that in an efficient manner. So we just write val and then name, and this is of type string. Then we write also val, and then this can be the amount, and this is of type double. And then the last thing that we want to do is keep track of the month. So this will be the name of this field will be month, and the type, this is kind of something new, is actually going to be this java.time thing, which we haven't actually gone over, like what this actually is. This is called an enum. But basically what you need to know is that we have all of the months right here, and this is what we're going to use in our expense data class. So this will help us to keep track of which month the expense incurred in. So we've created the expense class. So this part is actually already done. So good job. Let's move on now to the second part. It says create 13 instances of the class with the data provided above the main method. All right, so here's the data right here. And I've actually already pre-formatted this, so you don't have to go to a whole lot of trouble. I'm going to do the first one real quick. And then after I'm done with the first one, I'm actually going to fast forward through this because this is going to be really boring. I'm going to just spare you the pain of having to watch me type this all out, but I'll do the first one just so you know how this works. And then all we need to do is just copy and paste those fields right here. So here you go. So the name is car, the amount is this, and then the month that the expense incurred in was November. So really cool. And let's just prove that this actually works. So let's print out expense 1. Let's now run the program. And then there you go. Really cool. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give us a little bit more room to work. So now I'm actually going to fast forward this because what I need to do is to copy and paste all the other ones and just create numbers 1 through 13. And that's really boring. So I'll see you guys in a second. All right, so I have finished copying and pasting and creating all of the variables for all of the expenses. So just a quick recap, we instantiate the data class of type expense, and then we just save the result of that instantiation into this variable, and then we can use it later on. So something like this, and then just go expense 3, for example, and let's just click at the amounts. The amount for expense 3 should be 23.1. So then if we rerun this, that's what we expect to see, 23 run. Really cool. All right, let's move on to exercise 3 now. So in exercise 3, we are going to create a function. So what this function is going to do is that it's going to find the most expensive item from a list of expenses and then return it. And then at the end, once we have returned this from this function, we want to make sure that we print this in the main method. So what we can do now is we can leave this block right here. And then let's create our function. So let's call it find most expensive expense. And then let's fix this because this should be like that. As we know, this is going to take in a list of expenses. So let's call it expenses right here. So this is the name of the parameter. And then it's going to be a list of type expense, which we have created earlier. And excellent. So now once we have the actual expenses, let's take a look at them. All right, so it's a list, and we know that we actually want to use max by, which we've talked about in past videos. So if you're not quite sure what that does, just look at past videos. The previous one would be great for that. But max by, what it's going to do in a nutshell is we can provide it with criteria. And in this case, it would be the amount. And then it's going to find the one in the list that has the highest amount. So max by, you specify which field to look at, and then it's going to return actually the one that was the winner. So let's save this to a variable. Let's create a single variable. And let's just call this most expensive item. All right, really cool. So now that we have this, we need to actually return this. So we need to return something of type expense. We knew that already. And then we need to actually return this. But there's kind of a catch. So we actually need to unwrap this. If you remember, if you use max by on a list, it's possible that the incoming list, this guy, the parameter, is actually empty. If it is empty and you perform the max by, this is actually going to return null. So we have to unwrap it, which is something that we've also talked about in previous videos. So let's do if most expensive item equals to null. What do we want to do? Well, what we could do is just to return a blank expense. This isn't like the cleanest solution of all time. There's actually lots of different ways of handling this. But just for the purposes of this project, we are going to do just that. So instead of having null, we're just going to write maybe blank expense and then 0, 0, 0 for the amount, and then the month, whatever, we'll just make it January. So let's say that we do find something. So the return of this function invocation, so the return of calling max by on the expenses is not null. Then we go into this else here, and then we can just simply return the most expensive item. And now that it's been actually unwrapped, meaning that we've taken care of the null case, we can actually use this directly, and the compiler knows that, hey, it's safe for you to actually return this, and now it will return something of type expense. So let's actually go ahead and use this function that we've just created. So we can call it right here. And then let's give it a list of, and then actually we need to add all of the expenses, because if not, we are going to just give it an empty list, but we know what the actual result is of an empty list. But let's just actually see what that looks like. So this should just be empty or just blank expense. Let's call it blank expense. So because we know that what we are providing it is an empty list, we expect that the return here is actually going to be this right here, right? Because they didn't find anything, it's null, and then we return the expense right here. So let's actually go ahead and run this. Blank expense. All right, cool. Rerun that. Let's take a look at the output now. And it says, yeah, expense, name, blank expense, amount 00. All right, very cool. But now actually what we need to do is to put all of the expenses in a list of expenses, which we are going to use in the next exercises as well. So to spare you the pain, I'm going to fast forward this because I need to add all of the expenses here. I'll see you in a second. All done. All right, so now I have the list of expenses, and what I've actually done is I've put an expense on each line right here. What I also noticed is that I had the numbers wrong here, so I fixed that. It's now 1 through 13. One of these was actually like skipping a number, so I fixed that just in case you got a little bit confused. But all right, back to the exercise. So instead of passing in this list of, what we're going to do is pass in the list of expenses. So now what do we actually expect to happen? Let's take a look at the list again, and let's see which one of these is actually the biggest. So at a quick glance, it looks like, bingo, this one is the biggest one. So what we expect to get back in return is the car item. So let's see if we're actually right. But first, let's change the name of this variable. So this will be the most expensive expense. And then let's print it out and see what actually happens. And then it says, yep, expense, name car, amount, blah, 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 month, November. Really good job, guys. Let's move on now to the next exercise. So this will actually be the final exercise for part 1. And then the next video will pick up with exercise number 5. So this says, create a function that sums up all of the expenses and returns the final amount. Don't forget to print the result in the main method. All right, so really cool. Let's go back down here again, and then let's create the function. But what are we going to name it? It says it sums up all of the expenses and returns the final amount. All right, so we could call it sum up all expenses. What we know is that this is also going to take a list of expenses. But then this time, it's actually going to return a double and not an expense. We've done this kind of thing before. So what we need to do is we need to grab our list right here. And we need to transform this list so that we can actually sum up the values. So whenever you hear transform and list, you need to be thinking of map. So if you do not remember, you can go back to the lists video where we talked about transforming lists, and there you will get a better overview of what mapping does and exactly how it works. But anyways, so the expenses are mapped. For each expense, what we're interested in is just the amount. So now, if we save this to a variable right here, we can just call this amount from expenses. All right, now what we know is that this is actually of type list double. And then if you have a type list double, you can use this handy dandy sum on it, which only works if the list is actually of type double. So the first step is to turn the list into a list of amounts using map. And the second part is summing it up. Now, the third part of this that's really important, as always, is just to return it. So once you return it and then call it, so let's just call this variable total amount. Remember that you can call your variables anything you want. So sum up all expenses. Let's give it the expenses list. And now it says in here to not forget to print the result in the main method, which is exactly what we're doing right now. And then if we run this, it should be a pretty big number. Look at this, 16,845. Really cool, guys. That was the end of part 1, and I will see you right away for part 2.